All right, and we are live. Touch minute late tonight, gang. Sorry about that. Do my best to be prompt. So you probably saw from the title what we're discussing tonight is the number one thing people have asked me about the last 2 weeks in terms of real estate is this big Sitzer Burnett, I believe it is, commission lawsuit. This big commission lawsuit in which the plaintiffs won, the class action group of folks who were suing the National Association of Realtors and a number of real estate companies. Some of them settled earlier on, but then a few of them, including Keller Williams, stayed on to fight the lawsuit. And they were awarded $1.78 billion was awarded to these plaintiffs. And as a result, there are a lot of conversations about what ripples are going to happen through the industry. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Usually I limit it to, I try to keep it to like local Denver stuff. Here's what's happening. Here's what's coming up, that type of thing. This is the thing that keeps coming up. This is the question I keep getting. So I'm going to take you through it. People keep asking, what does it mean? What is it going to change? I've heard XYZ. I've heard real estate's going to change. I've heard the way realtors are going to get paid is going to change. I'm going to take you through it and try to decipher it to the best of my abilities. As always with these lives, if you have a question on this, if you have a question on anything, chime in the chat and let's get it going. It can be about this. It can be about anything. The point of going live is to interact. So love when people do that. We did that a little bit last week. So we're going to do that. What we're going to do, I have a little Cotillion Pinot Noir, Sonoma County tonight. And so we're going to pour a glass of wine and we're going to talk lawsuits. So, losing the cork here. So this has been the big thing in the news, and it is actually a really big deal. The first thing to note about this lawsuit, $1.8 billion almost. What's that going to mean for the industry? Well, right away, nothing, because like any lawsuit, especially a big one like this, is going to be tied up in appeals for a long time and countersuits and general legal proceedings, things that take years. So we're not going to see the effect of this thing for years. So I don't know, NAR, National Association of Realtors, has vowed to fight it tooth and nail, and we're going to get this overturned. We'll see. I'm going to share some of my thoughts about NAR later on when we get to it, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in them. So I'm going to share my screen here, and basically the first thing I want to look at is this here. Okay, this is a CNN article. After $1.8 billion verdict, the clock is ticking on the 6% real estate commission. We'll talk about all this 6%. Some of you folks know what that means, some don't. We're going to scroll down here. So this first paragraph here, let's just read this for a second. Using a travel agent to buy a plane ticket or stockbroker to trade equities seem like relics of the past. And yet, every day, people across America hire a real estate agent to help them sell a home. It's one of the very few industries, it's one of the few industries that has been able to largely avoid the disruption that has helped consumers cut costs in the internet age. I'm going to take a second and take a sip of wine. So, you guys know who watched this. I'm a real estate agent. That's how I make my living. It's the reason I started this channel. In this lawsuit, real estate agents are not innocent. In fact, a big part of why this happened is because of shady and or lazy practices from realtors. I'm not going to say it's all their fault, but they are definitely at fault. And that is what the courts found too. Hence this huge, huge verdict. That being said, this first paragraph, one of the dumber things I've read in a long time. I get why a lot of people say what they do about CNN. Using a travel agent to buy a plane ticket or a stockbroker to trade equities seem like relics of the past. Okay, what about using an attorney to represent you in a legal proceeding? Or, I don't know, a financial advisor to help you invest? Are those things relics of the past? I'm not putting real estate agents certainly on the same level as lawyers or financial advisors, but the truth is there are some industries that haven't been disrupted by the internet or just automation, basically, because people still find value in those more traditional ways of doing things. Financial advisor is actually a good parallel, I think, because can you invest in your own stockbroker? Can you invest on your own? Yeah, you can go on Robinhood or whatever and invest your money. A lot of people still choose to work with a financial advisor because they don't want to have to learn it. Financial advisor is an expert, and they're going to probably get them better returns. It's easier. A whole lot of reasons. That's why people learn. People largely choose to work with real estate agents. Now, number one, it's easier. It's a limited practice of law, so they don't want to do that themselves and open themselves up to that liability. They don't want to deal with it. And also, you're going to make more money. And so just to pop over to a different tab here real quick, because that's the thing. People actually make more money when they're working with real estate agents. There was a separate lawsuit about this. Open Door to pay $62 million to settle an FTC claim. It misled home sellers. Going to hit on this real quick. $62 million in this context seems minuscule, and really is. Open Door, for those of you who don't know, they're one of the disruptors. They are an online iBuyer. They started that whole "we'll buy your house" sight unseen, maybe sight seen, whatever. We'll buy your house. You don't have to go list it. You don't have to use a real estate agent. Cut them out of the deal. That's fine. We'll make it easier. Okay. Real estate agents are travel agents. Open Door is here to save you from them. They got sued because Open Door software, software way of buying homes. The FTC said they tricked customers by promising they would make more money by selling to the company, to Open Door, than they would on the open market. Company agreed to pay $62 million. Basically, these people were saying, you'll make more money with us. FTC said in a statement, Open Door's offers on houses were below market value on average, while its costs were typically higher than what a normal consumer would pay for a real estate agent. So not only were you getting less for your home, you were paying more in fees than you would pay the big bad real estate agent. So just some food for thought for this CNN article, because I don't know. I thought that was hilarious. But basically, we're going to get into it here about what actually happened. They're talking about the power of the National Association of Realtors and the verdict that was handed down. Okay, in a Missouri court on Tuesday found that NAR, National Association of Realtors, is NAR, and two brokerage firms, Home Services of America, which is Berkshire Hathaway, and I believe a few others, and Keller Williams, were liable for $1.8 billion in damages for conspiring to keep commissions artificially high. Okay, so that's what happens. RE/MAX and Anywhere Real Estate, which owns Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's, and Corcoran, they settled out of court for a combined $140 million. So they had previously settled and paid much, much less than now these other two are going to be theoretically forced to pay. Let's see what happens after all the appeals and such. So basically, as terms of the settlement, they each announced commitments to making changes in the business practices, including not requiring agents to be members of NAR. See, so that is interesting, and that's a change, because most of these big brokerages, the brokerage I work for, does require me to be a National Association of Realtors member. And again, we'll touch on this later, but many of us have been asking recently, what are we getting for our membership dues other than being forced into doing it? NAR is very expensive. They do a lot of paying people who work for them, but they theoretically do a lot for real estate professionals. I don't know. We'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, so NAR and the brokerages have vowed to appeal the verdict, which means real estate commissions aren't going anywhere immediately. So that's CNN. There's a better article here in the New York Times about this. So jury finds conspiracy among realtors. So basically, they're gonna get into a little bit more about what happened. So it's the potential to rewrite the entire structure of the real estate industry in the United States. Maybe lowering the cost of moving homes by reducing commissions. So this is where we get into it. Basically, what the lawsuit alleged and proved basically was that listing agents were misrepresenting what the seller was paying. So if you've been involved in a real estate transaction, one second, you probably know that there is typically an agent on both sides. Listing agent who works with the seller and the buyer's agent who works with the buyer. The commission for both of those agents is paid by the seller. The idea, I guess, being the seller is the one making money off the sale of the home. So they pay the buyer's agent. They pay the buyer's agent to bring a buyer to the sale. And then they pay the listing agent to list the home as well. It's not what always happens because there are no rules about this. It's just sort of a standard practice in the industry, and certainly here in Colorado. This is something that should always be explained to the seller in the listing presentation and along the way. This is something that any seller should, number one, be made aware of by their real estate professional, but also can be aware of and will be aware of if they are reading the documents that they are signing. If they are reading their settlement statement, they will see they are paying a commission to both the buyer's agent and the listing agent. Think about this. It's a standard, but it's not a rule. There's no rule that says, there never has been a rule that says the seller has to pay a certain percentage to the buyer's agent. New York Times says under a NAR rule, a home seller is required to pay commissions to the agent representing the buyer. That has never been my understanding of it in Colorado. Most of them will, because it's good. Number one, it's an industry standard, but number two, it's good business practice. Because if you're not going to pay the buyer's agent, let's see how many buyers show up to the house. It's the reality of it, because buyer's agent needs to get compensated somehow. And if they're not getting compensated by the seller or the listing brokerage, chances are they are going to ask the buyer to make up that delta. And the buyer then is going to have a decision to make about whether they still want to go offer on the house and pay significantly more, pay that 3%. It's 5% in some states, 6% in some states, can't even be more, total commission. So roughly 3 goes to the buyer's agent, 3 goes to the seller's agent percentage. Here in Colorado, the most typical arrangement is 3.2% goes to the listing agent, 2.8% goes to the buyer's agent. The idea that the listing agent is the one spending money marketing, they're making a little bit more. Again, it doesn't always happen. These things are always negotiable. And a lot of the time, sellers will want to try to, or at least negotiate that fee. That is their right. And that's something that, in my experience, sellers are aware of. But the lawsuit is claiming that NAR forced them to pay excessive fees to the agents. Home sellers said the brokerages collaborated with NAR to enforce what is called cooperative compensation rule. Okay, under the verdict, sellers would no longer be required to pay the buyer's agents. Again, sellers were never required to pay the buyer's agents, at least here in Colorado. And agents would be free to set their own commission rates, which could be slashed in half or less. Agents have always been free to set their own commission rates, at least since I have been in the industry. 6% is standard, like I said, 3.2 to one side, 2.8 to another side. Agents will commonly charge more than that, and they'll make more. Sometimes listing agents will say, okay, it's 6%, but I get 4%. The buyer's agent gets 2%. Sometimes they'll offer 2.5% to the buyer's agent. Sometimes if they have no value proposition, the listing agent will take much less just to get the listing. All of these things happen on a daily basis, and I see them happen on a daily basis in the industry. So basically, for example, a home seller with a $1 million home can now pay as much as $60,000 in agent commissions. They can pay more than that. They can pay more than that easily, depending on the agent they're working with. They can pay less than that, 30% to their agent and 30% to the buyer's agent, or sorry, 30 grand and 30 grand. NAR has been on trial in Kansas City in an antitrust suit brought by nearly 500,000 Missouri home sellers. So it's a class action lawsuit. It's a whole, hey, have you been scammed? Get in on this. You may be entitled to compensation. Okay, so NAR, as well as Keller Williams and Home Services, headed to trial. The others basically or did settle outside of court. They're like, we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to see where this is going. Turns out that may have been the right call. But the 8-person delivered the verdict. Yes, there's been a conspiracy, and not only would the defendants be required to pay damages, but those damages could triple, because this could go up to $5 billion if certain things are met. I don't know what those things are, and it doesn't even really matter. Here we get into talking about NAR. It has more than $1 billion in assets and owns the trademark of the word realtor. So if you use the word realtor to describe yourself, you must be a member of the National Association of Realtors. Otherwise, you are just a real estate agent. This is NAR's big thing. This is one of the big reasons they exist. And I don't know if you're seeing it on my face, but it does get to be a situation where you start to ask yourself, why am I paying all these dues for someone who their big thing is that we call ourselves realtors, and they do like a Super Bowl commercial every year, which is insanely expensive, and that comes out of what you're paying them. So anyway, NAR said it plans to appeal. Okay, the verdict. Okay, paying out. I want to get to NAR a little bit. We could say Redfin recently exited the National Association of Realtors, so not requiring their agents to be NAR members. They're questioning the standard commissions. Redfin has always done that because they operate at a much more limited level as far as what they do for people. And so in exchange, they do often charge less. Okay, so we're getting, more than 1.5 million real estate agents across the U.S. pay dues to the organization in order to call themselves realtors. But after a series of sexual harassment allegations led to the resignation of the organization's president this summer, Tuesday's ruling threatens to further diminish their influence and could, according to some real estate agents, prompt many to abandon them entirely. This is what I'm talking about. When you look at NAR's board and their payroll, they have many, many bloated salaries. They pay an ungodly amount to marketing companies to, like I said, do that one commercial and try to make everybody call themselves realtors or not if they're not a member. There have been a number of allegations and people who've had to step down. It's just kind of a mess. And so it's this trade organization that's become very, very bloated. And we're starting to wonder how valuable NAR is. And this lawsuit may expedite some things and may make them less prominent in the industry. We'll see. What's up, Marcos? How you doing? And by the way, I said this off the top, but people pop in and out. If you have any questions on this or anything real estate or anything Denver, anything I talk about on this channel, my shirt, if you're a Tim Dillon fan, I respect you. Pop them in the chat because that's the best part of this from time to time. So this guy, Jason Haber, says this is an earthquake. He's a real estate agent with Compass, who's been one of the most outspoken critics of NAR. Disappointed in today's verdict. I'm even more disappointed in NAR. This was their Super Bowl and World Series rolled up into one, and not even Taylor Swift could have saved them. Jason, you had it. You had it there, and you really just fumbled it at the end, to use a football analogy. Anyway, so that's the thing. This trade organization has been bloated for a while. They did... Basically, it was NAR's practice that said, hey, this is how we're going to do things, whether it was something you had to do or not. It was a standard practice in the industry that says the listing agent pays this much, and they pay some to the seller pays this much, they pay some to the listing agent. They say they pay some to the buyer's agent. That may be changing. People are wondering what the ramifications of this are going to be. Okay, so to me, it's a number of things. Number one, people can get really extreme with it. Okay. Thank you. Tillian, very nice. Very nice. So some people saying, oh, our buyer's agent's going to go away. Sellers are now going to know that they don't have to pay a buyer's agent. So none of them are going to pay the buyer's agents. Okay. That's one thought. And buyer's agents are going to go away. It's possible, but it would be pretty unique in any industry to have a large financial transaction like this happening and only one side of the transaction be represented. Right now, you don't have to have representation as a buyer. You can do that on your own, or as a seller. You can do those things on your own. Representation not required on either side. A for sale by owner. It happens all the time. People decide to sell their homes by themselves. So the idea that buyer's agents are going away altogether is probably not a good one. Like I said, this is going to be caught up in appeals for years. And so nothing's happening immediately. What we have seen already, though, is different things happening in the basically in terms of just communication. It's being the MLS, NAR, a lot of our brokerages, everybody is really, really encouraging us to be much more clear about what your rights are as a buyer or seller, what's required, what's not, what's negotiable. For those of us who've been doing this a certain way, we always explained all these things. We were always upfront about all these things. But like I said off the top, real estate agents, I've spent some time kind of defending them here and defending what we do, but real estate agents are not blameless in this at all. Quick story. When I got into real estate, it was actually my wife, Kristen's idea. And she said, you should go into residential real estate. I think you'd be good at it, whatever. And my initial reaction was no. because realtors are douchebags. And I maintain, after working in this industry for years, that that is true of many real estate agents. Many of them are not. Many of them are very good at the job, have great ethics and morals and all that type of stuff. But many of them suck. It's a low barrier of entry for this um, profession, and the profession is not viewed very highly. I think it's right above or right below car salesman in terms of trust. And that is an us problem. That's something we got to fix. But that shows there's a reason for that, and this lawsuit is a reason for that. Many have been doing this job properly for a long time and disclosing all these things properly for a long time. Many have not been, and overall, it's going to be better for the industry that those things change. As far as going back to the ripple effects of it, the possibility is that number one, things are just disclosed more and sellers keep paying the buyer's agent commission most of the time. It also could move to the buyers. And now the buyer could pay their representation in the transaction and the seller could pay their representation in the transaction, as happens with many, many things. Lawyers, for example, that would not surprise me. What's it going to do? Now, can buyers not afford to buy houses? No, it'll all adjust, because if a buyer has to bring more money, that means they have less purchasing power. Home prices will probably adjust accordingly. It all comes out in the wash. Basically, it's all going to be, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that it's all going to work itself out in one way or another. Even if buyers are paying buyers agents, home prices may come down to adjust that for that lower purchasing power they have. And it's essentially going to be a wash, or very well could change loan standards and mortgage standards. Okay, now as a buyer, you have to pay a real estate agent commission. Well, can we roll that into the loan? That's a whole new bag of worms. That's a whole new question that the industry was going to have to answer. And they will. They will. That'll all get figured out. And I'm going to take you through what I'm doing and what we're doing as a result of this here in a second with an actual contract. Rowan, what is up, man? General analysis of the STR climate in Denver. Yes. Absolutely, I can do that. Let me touch on that after I get through this. I actually did a video on that somewhat recently that I thought sum some of that up, but let me chat about that too here in a couple minutes. So I want to pop over here and just take you into this is our buyer agency agreement. Okay, so this is what I sign with buyers that allows me to represent them legally. It's kind of boring, and by kind of, I mean a lot. So I'm not going to take you through all of it. A lot of it is boilerplate. This is just a test contract that I have to show to people. But there's one section here that is now the subject of a lot of scrutiny that we've been talking about and going back and forth on the best way to do this for a long time. So success fee, brokerage firm will be paid as follows, which means then they pay me. I'm paid as follows. A fee equal to 2.8% ideally of the purchase price. But who pays that is the question. That's when we come down here to 7.3. 7.3 has been discussed at length since I got into the industry, and it's something that a managing broker has advised us to protect ourselves as best as possible. So there's three different options. Listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. Buyer is obligated to pay. Or number two, buyer will pay. Just straight up, buyer will pay. I've never checked that one. I'm sure there are certain situations where it matters or where it makes sense. And then number 7.33, listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. Buyer is not obligated to pay. Here's how it goes. Thank you for hanging on through my sips of wine. When you get into the industry, first of all, we have always been, or I have always been advised to check 7.3.1. Listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. Buyer is obligated to pay. For my first year or two, often I checked this one. Buyer is not obligated to pay. Why? I didn't want to have the conversation. And I wanted to make it easy and say, hey, don't worry. You're not going to have to pay anything. See, it says it right here. The majority of the time, and by the majority of the time, I mean every buyer transaction I've ever done, that's what's happened. I've been paid by the seller through the listing brokerage. So basically, I would check this, and it was no big deal because it never came up. It never came to be a problem. I was always advised, though, if you really want to protect yourself and you're okay with having the hard conversations, because honestly, having hard conversations is a big part of our job if we're doing this at a high level, you check this one. Buyer is obligated to pay. Here's why. And here's how I explain it to buyers now. Listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. They're almost always going to pay. And like I said, in my case, it has been always based on the way the structure works. Based on in the MLS, you can see, and you can see who's offering to pay a buyer agent commission, pretty much all of them, and what the buyer agent commission is. It's going to come from the seller. However, if we check this box that the buyer is obligated to pay, once I have this agreement signed by all parties, I become a fiduciary for the buyer, meaning I have to act in their best interest at all times in this transaction. It is my ethical and legal obligation. If they are obligated to pay, that opens up the opportunity for me to negotiate my commission on my behalf. So basically, if they're obligated to pay and we run into a situation like a for sale by owner, for example, who says, no, I don't like real estate agents. I don't want to offer a real estate commission. I don't have to. I don't want anybody to get paid off this. Okay. And the buyer who I'm working with really wants that house. Well, great. The buyer doesn't necessarily have to pay, but I have the power to now negotiate that with the seller or the seller's agent if they have one, negotiate my compensation from them on my behalf because it is in the buyer's best interest now because they have an obligation to pay and I have a fiduciary duty to them. And I always explain, hey, there could be some crazy situation that we run into. It's never happened, but where they're not offering a commission, I do attempt to negotiate it and they just say, hey, no, we're not going to do that. Then you as the buyer, you're going to have a decision to make. You can go ahead and buy the house and then you are on the hook to pay my fee, or we can go buy a different house where the seller's offering the compensation. That's up to the buyer. Again, it's never gotten there, but I like to have that discussion with the buyer. Anyway, the point of all this being, this box is going to be checked a lot more now because whether or not things are changing right now, there is thought that they will be changing, or basically people are thinking about this a lot more than they used to think about it in the past. So that's what's going on there. So Rowan, let me pull this up. Okay, wait, let me go back to this. So general analysis of short-term. If anybody has any questions on this, it's probably really boring, but I keep getting asked about it. So the whole commission thing. So basically, bottom line is this. Realtors have been shady, some of them for a long time. If sellers were looking at the documents they were signing, they would all know that they were paying a buyer's agent as well as the listing agent. However, it's going to become much more obvious now. People are going to be more informed. The shadiness will go away to some degree. It's going to be better for the industry in the long run. This lawsuit will also be tied up in appeals for years. We will not see the effects of this probably for years. If the effects actually happen, it may be not much. It may be significant. We'll see. Are real estate agents going away? I don't know. Maybe. I always just say, yeah, let me know when we're going away and I'll do something else. I'm not worried about it. We were going away with Zillow. We were going away with Open Door. We were probably going away back when the internet came around. I don't know. It's not something I concern myself with. As long as people are finding value in it, it'll stick around. So let me pull up the YouTube channel here because I want to show you the video I did on the short-term rental market, which is funny because the first video I had that started getting me a lot of phone calls off my YouTube channel was the first video I did on Denver short-term rentals and the rules, because short-term rental rules in the Denver area are really, really confusing. And it's getting better, but for a long time, there was no real one central resource for knowing where you can have a short-term rental and where you cannot. For those who don't know, short-term rentals are like Airbnb or VRBO, something you're renting on a weekend or week basis, anything you're renting for under 30 days or less, actually. And so what's going on with them basically is so in Denver, the city of Denver, and many of the suburbs, we have a primary residence rule. Basically, they started putting these in the last few years, and the majority of areas around here have them. And so what that does is says basically, if you want to have a short-term rental, you can have that, but it has to be your primary residence. You have to be living there full time because they don't want whole neighborhoods getting bought up by investors and just essentially, nobody has anywhere to live. It makes sense. I always say it makes sense. On one hand, I say, let people do what they want with their property. But on the other hand, like, I get it. So here's the deal. I did this other video on that not too long ago about the update, and it was called, let me share my screen real quick. It's this one right here, Airbnb crash. And I'll put the link to that in the comments if you want to check it out. And maybe you've already checked it out, but there were people online calling for Oh, jeez, that's loud. Jeez, now I'm playing. Okay, calm down, Sam. People online basically saying, hey, all these people who invested in Airbnb properties, they weren't going to, basically, they're losing money on their Airbnb now. There's too many of them. People are stopping doing it. All these people are going to sell their Airbnb properties because they can't make any money anymore. And now they are going to sell, and it's going to flood the market with inventory, and prices are going to bottom out because there's too much inventory and there's going to be a crash. So this video that I did was looking at that and basically looking at whether or not that was true. There's this one guy, he's called Reventure Consulting on YouTube. He's got a ton of views, ton of followers. And he's always like walking around a neighborhood and yelling about how like sky's falling, like everything's crashing and the world's going to hell and we're all going to die. And he did this. He basically, he took a data set and said, look at all these cities where Airbnb revenue is way, way down. And it was compelling. Then somebody responded to him with a better data set and said, actually, that's not technically true. It's misleading. Basically, what the first guy did was took data just from Airbnb, just from the website Airbnb, and left out the website VRBO, which is responsible for like almost half of bookings. And when you put all that data together, it painted a much more reasonable picture. Like Airbnb revenues were flat. And here in Denver, from one year to the next, so from 2022 to 2023, I believe it was, we were actually up like 0.5% in Airbnb revenue across the board. And that's in terms of median nightly rate in our short-term rentals here. So the short-term rental market in Denver remains strong. Really what's going on is that primary residence rule. There are a few places it doesn't have to be your primary residence to buy a place and rent it out as an Airbnb. There are some other restrictions, but they don't have the primary residence rule. Jefferson County is one of them. So Evergreen, Conifer, a lot of those areas in Jefferson County, it has to be on 1 acre or more. That's the big rule there, but it doesn't have to be your primary, at least right now. Centennial, North Glen, Westminster, Arvada doesn't have to be your primary, but you can only do it 2/3 of the year, which is actually enough. Most people have natural vacancy to cover almost 1/3 of the year. And one specific district in Wheat Ridge, which is it's District 3. Basically, that's the one district where they still have licenses left. So you still have to get licensed. Yeah, no HOA. That's a great point. No HOA, because the majority of HOAs will not allow you to rent your place on a short-term basis. They will not allow you to Airbnb it. Not all of them, but like 98% of them. So that's what you're looking for. If you want to invest in a place, in an Airbnb property, and you want to look for something that's in one of these places, it doesn't have to be a primary, or you can just lie, which is a lot of people do. No, don't lie. That's illegal. And you want to look for something without an HOA, or some HOAs do. I got one investor who bought with an HOA, and they allow you to rent it, but it's usually the more relaxed, the HOAs that cost like $60 a year, and they're like, yeah, we got a pickleball court, and like that's the whole thing. Those are the ones who usually have the more relaxed rules. So the reason that it's unlikely that there's an Airbnb crash here in Denver is because of this primary residence rule. What it does is, if you're an investor, it's annoying because you got to jump through all these hoops. But once you do have a property that you are then going to Airbnb, whether that's an investment property or whether it's your primary that you just honestly want to rent out a few weeks a year when you're not there, it restricts the supply of the Airbnb options that are available to people. So when supply is restricted, prices go and stay higher. There's fewer places people to have to choose from. In some places, like Phoenix, like parts of Florida, no rules whatsoever. It's just the Wild West. And basically, prices have dropped significantly, and it's hard to make money. In Summit County and parts of Eagle County, it is hard to make money because there are restrictions there, but there are certain zones. It's mostly the resort zones. So like all the condos where you can have an Airbnb. So people are buying all these 1-bedroom condos, or have bought all these 1-bedroom condos, and then they're Airbnbing them, and there's just a ton of competition. So it's really hard to make much money. But in Denver, that competition is still low. So that's one of the reasons that our numbers have stayed strong as far as the Airbnb revenue in this town. In your opinion, does it seem worth it to rent out a partial if it's your primary residence? Would there be a significant ROI to justify giving away a bedroom basement space for rental? Yeah, totally. if you want to, if you're okay with someone like living in your house, or renting in your house, just being there for a weekend or a week or whatever. Totally. Because you're all that's doing is offsetting your mortgage. Like regardless of what you make, if you rent out a room for $80 a night, and you rent it out for 5-10 days a month, I mean, that's going to go towards offsetting your mortgage. So it's totally up to you. I got 2 kids, I probably don't want any renters, but if I, in my house at the same time as me, but if I had, say, a basement with an exterior entry and it was kind of self-contained, then that would be something I'd consider. And those are really unique properties that sometimes I look for when people are considering this. It's a form of what's called house hacking, where you can live in your house, but then there's another kind of separate suite that people can live in either on a short-term rental basis or a long-term rental basis, that they're not even like going to be disturbing you. They're just there. That can be really, really beneficial. Rowan, 50% reduction of mortgage payment, or is that overly optimistic? Well, it just depends. Sorry, but the answer is it depends. It depends on how much you rent it out, how much money you rent it out for, and then how often you rent it out. But if your mortgage is $3,000 or say even $4,000, if you're renting out a room, or even if you have like a little in-law suite or something like that, yeah, you can make $2,000 a month. That's reasonable. I have no kids and will be buying in Centennial for reference. Yeah. Well, and by the way, Centennial does not have short-term rental or a primary residence rule. You don't care because you want to live there. So I get that. But yeah, no, I think it is a worthy pursuit, especially if you want to, just offset your mortgage and make some money, and you don't mind using your house, making your house or part of your house work for you. Yeah. Thank you. You got it, buddy. Let me know when you have any other questions. Let me know when you want to buy a place. Centennial. We just offered on a house in Centennial today. Did we get it? I don't see signatures yet. Nothing yet. We wait. Any other questions, guys? Thanks for logging on tonight. Feel like I kind of rambled. Must have been the wine, but moral of the story, I don't know. Headlines are sensationalized. CNN, wow. Sorry, that first paragraph, that got me. They're like, why do real estate agents still exist? And I'm like, okay. Why does CNN still exist? No, I'm kidding. I know why they do. Anyway, love you guys. Thanks for hopping on. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you have questions, thoughts, ideas for videos in general, or the live for next week or weeks going forward, hit me up. My contact information is all over all this stuff. And yeah, love hanging out with you here on Tuesday nights. Love you. Bye, guys.